Hey everyone, in this video I'll be going over a pretty interesting blaster, the Gavinfuzzy SBF. This is a 3D printed brushless flywheeler that has select fire. Quick disclaimer, this is not a sponsored video. We paid for the hardware kit at the full price of 450 Singaporean dollars, not including shipping or LiPos. Keep in mind that this is also a beta test blaster, so the design may change slightly by the time of its full release. I was not compensated in any way to make this video, so all the opinions are my own. But Gavin, if you're watching this video and need someone to help test out the SBL2, I know a guy. Disclaimer out of the way, let's go over this blaster from tip to butt. This is the standard muzzle that comes with the SBF files. It threads onto the end of the bearing barrel and keeps the handguard in place. This gives toolless access to the battery compartment, which is inside the handguard. Just remove the muzzle from the barrel and the handguard slides right off. The SBF uses an XT60 for the battery connector and it runs off 4S LiPos. Gavin sells 4Ss for the SBF, so you won't have to worry about figuring out the correct LiPo specs and sourcing them yourself if you're lazy. Removing the handguard also exposes the bearing barrel. If you've been keeping up with the hobby recently, bearing scars have been the hit thing lately. To not overcomplicate things and to avoid digressing too much, the bearings give the dart some spin as they leave the flywheels, which improves their accuracy. Reattaching the handguard, there are Picatinny on the 12, 3, 6, and 9 positions for any attachments you might want to put on. Included in the files are a hand stop, an angled foregrip, and front and rear iron sights. The hand stop and angled foregrip are designed to be used together like this, but they also work separately and on other Picatinny rails. The front and rear sights are fixed and are not adjustable. Moving back, there are sling points on either side of the blaster. The hole is too small for any slings I own, so you'll either need a sling with small clips or small carabiners for your sling to attach to in order to use them. On the left side of the blaster there is a clear window. I'm guessing it's there so you can see if your mag is empty or not, but it's also really cool when you have the tracer setting turned on. The mag release is also very similar to the SBL's mag release, so if you're familiar with that one, you'll have no trouble using this one. Like the SBL, the trigger guard is actually part of the mag release, so if you push down on it, you can actually drop the mag. Personally, I find using the mag release like this a bit uncomfortable, but it's another option in case you like it, and it's also out of the way if you don't use it. The mag release can also be used like any standard paddle mag release that you're used to, and is ambidextrous. One improvement that I like about this mag release compared to the SBL's one is the sides of the SBF mag release are extended slightly, so you have more surface area to hit when reloading quickly, or if you have long index fingers, you can even activate it with one hand. There is no rev trigger, but the main trigger revs up the blaster on trigger pull. It's not technically a dual stage trigger because you can't half press it to just rev the flywheels. Instead, pulling the trigger will activate the flywheels and then activate the pusher on a slight delay. This is also a crazy good hair trigger. It only has a very little amount of play before hitting the switch and firing. At the end of the top Picatinny rail there is the on-off switch, LED screen, and the control dial. I'll go over all the settings in a bit. Above the trigger is the fire selector switch. From left to right, on the left side of the blaster, it goes safe, semi-auto, burst, and full auto. It is ambidextrous and has a nice click into each position. The SBF has a standard Nerf stock attachment point, so if you don't like the included stock, you can take it off and replace it with any other Nerf stock you might have. The included stock has a bit of Picatinny at the top, so the rear side can be put behind the control group. This means if you want to replace the stock, you won't be able to put your rear side in this position. The included stock can be both extended and folded to the side of the blaster. The button to fold the stock is located on the left hand side of the blaster. Push it in and it will unlatch so you can fold it to the side. There are magnets on both the right hand side of the blaster and the left hand side of the stock, so when the stock is folded it will lock into place. The magnets aren't too strong and it only takes a small amount of force to separate them. To extend the length of the stock, just pull down this lever and pull the stock. The stock has 3 positions, which are fully collapsed, halfway extended, and fully extended. There are cutouts on the right hand side of the stock, so it can be folded and locked into place without the front sling mount getting in the way. Now this isn't included in the SBF files, but I have created a mock suppressor which replaces the standard threaded muzzle. It threads onto the bearing barrel the same way, and it has a large inner diameter so it shouldn't hinder performance too much. All it does is make the blaster look a bit cooler in my opinion, and if you couldn't tell by the blasters on the wall behind me, I do like putting excessively large suppressors on flywheel blasters. When I ordered the SBF from Gavin, he gave me the option to change the startup sound, so of course I had to pick a classic. Once the blaster is on and the Gavinfuzzy logo disappears, the display will show the firing mode currently selected. It will change when you select a different mode using the firing selector. To open the settings menu, press down on the dial. You will then have access to the following settings and the pre-programmed values they came with. ESC speed at 75%, which controls the motor speed, burst rate of fire at 18 darts per second, auto rate of fire at 15 darts per second, burst at 3 rounds, pusher delay at 0.17 seconds, hang time at 0.2 seconds, spin down at 1 second, low battery warning at 14.4 volts, tracer off, the about page, and a reset option. Turn the dial to navigate the menu and press down to select an option to edit. When you're done tweaking your settings, scroll back to the top and press down on the dial to close the menu. Playing around with the settings will let you dial in the performance to suit your playstyle best. Turning the tracer setting on will activate an LED inside the magwell whenever the blaster is fired. This is pretty cool if you have glow-in-the-dark darts and are playing at night or in a low light environment. Assembling the SBF is pretty straightforward for a Flywheeler. Everything is already pre-soldered by Gavin, so all you really need to do is plug the components into the motherboard. However, the solder on our battery connector did end up breaking as there was very little solder in the connection. Keep this in mind as you might end up needing to touch up the connections in your hardware kit too. The files include an instructions PDF with some nice graphics that are very easy to follow. There is also a Word doc with some print instructions and some slicer settings which should make the printing process a bit easier. All the STLs are already oriented for printing, so all you need to do is import them into your slicer and follow the print instructions document. Our SBF was printed in PLA Plus from 3D Phillies in a white and blue color scheme to match our existing SBL. The printing process was pretty straightforward and it took us about a week to get everything printed using a mix of Gavin's and our slicer settings. The SBF is made mostly out of large prints, so the assembled blaster is very solid compared to something like the Griffin. Now onto performance. Using worker high-end darts in the pre-programmed settings, the SBF was hitting an average of 155 FPS with a high of 170 and a low of 116. I assume these are the settings that come pre-installed with the hardware kit as they seem to be the most balanced performance-wise. With my custom suppressor attached, it hits an average of 153 FPS with a high of 168 and a low of 111. The suppressor seems to drop the FPS a tiny amount, but the difference is negligible. After tweaking the settings bit for maximum motor speed, it was hitting an average of 168 FPS with a high of 176 and a low of 138. I did have to extend the trigger delay to about half a second though, just so the motors would have enough time to reach top speed. With these settings only achieving an average about 10 FPS higher than the normal settings, I don't think it's worth the really long trigger delay. And finally, for the fun of it, I decided to do 2 14-round mag dumps over the chronograph using the standard settings. This achieved an average of 144 FPS with a high of 194 and a low of -1. I guess 15 darts per second is too fast for my chronograph to keep up with as it kept failing to read a lot of the shots. According to Gavin, the SBF should be hitting an average of 170 FPS, so the numbers I got is a bit lower than what's expected. My readings were all taken with fresh darts, but it might be worth noting that I was chroning the blaster on a really cold day, which might have affected the dart slightly, so your mileage might vary. With the chrony readings out of the way, let's go outside and see it shoot. The SBF is a great blaster and hands down the most accurate flywheel blaster I've ever used. You still won't be able to outsnipe springers without arcing your shots, but being able to send an accurate mag dump their way makes up for it. This is all possible due to the bearing barrel, which helps stabilize the darts as they fly through the air. The bearing barrel does seem to be a bit of a double-edged sword though. It does improve accuracy significantly, but it also bleeds FPS as the darts pass through it. While I was filming the firing demo, I had a dart get stuck in the bearings a few times. I think this is an issue with the darts themselves, with the darts being fed into the bearings at a slight angle which causes the rubbery head of the dart to hit the bearings and get stuck. To clear the jam, I had to remove the handguard and slide the bearings manually to roll the dart far enough down the barrel so it would gravity drop out. Sometimes I also had to shoot another dart to free the first one since it wasn't far enough for the bearings to grip it. This jamming issue did not occur often during my testing, but due to it requiring the blaster to be slightly disassembled, it can be quite problematic if it happens during a game. Moving on, the select fire is pretty fun to mess around with. Having a safety is great for when you're waiting in between games and don't want to turn the blaster off, or if you're handing the blaster over to someone who wants to have a look at it. Being able to swap between semi, burst, and full auto is also fun and can actually be useful in games. Want to conserve ammo? Use semi-auto to control your shots better. See a large group of enemies? Flick it to full auto and mag dump them. Like double tapping people? Burst is also an option. During testing, burst was my favorite of the 3 firing modes. On semi-auto, the motors weren't always able to reach full speed when tap firing quickly, which made it the most inconsistent mode when shooting quickly. Full auto is fun, but I'll still need to do some more testing on how many darts per second I like best. The preset 15 darts per second is a fun dart hose, but a bit overkill for me. An 18 darts per second 2-round burst is a good middle ground between the two, as it gives the follow-up shot I'm used to taking with flywheelers, while also remaining fairly consistent when I need to shoot more. The stock is also a great design. The folding feature is actually useful outside of just shortening the blaster for storage, as it actually locks the stock into place. Because the magnets lock the stock to the side of the blaster, you can actually use the blaster like this in a game without worrying about the stock flying around everywhere. The magnets are strong enough so the stock won't shake free, but they're weak enough that it only takes a little amount of force to separate them. Being able to extend the stock is also great, so it'll be more comfortable for more people. The fact that the stock can be extended and still folded and lock into place is great in case you quickly fold the stock without collapsing it first. I find the stock most comfortable at its longest setting, so if you're taller than me, you might not be able to extend the stock long enough to be comfortable for you. This is where the N-Strike stock attachment point comes in handy. If you don't like the included stock, you can swap it out for a stock that you do like. Keep in mind you will lose the Picatinny rail on the top of the stock, so you won't be able to put your rear iron sight behind the control group. If you couldn't tell by now, the SBF seems to be heavily inspired by the Scorpion Evo, which is a real steel SMG. This means you should be careful using it in public spaces and make sure to print it in bright colors. I know the silhouette can be a bit of a turn-off for some people, but it does fit into Gavin's design language present in the SBL and the upcoming SBL2. You could probably redesign the handguard slightly and change out the stock to make it more sci-fi looking if that's more your style. As a self-proclaimed LARPer I am, I quite like the aesthetics of the SBF. Now it's time to answer the question on should you buy an SBF. If you're looking for a do-it-all flywheeler, this is the blaster for you. 150 to 160 FPS out of a flywheeler is pretty competitive, and with the bearing barrel you'll be getting accuracy that can't be matched by most other blasters. 150 to 160 FPS is pretty competitive out of a flywheel blaster, and with the bearing barrel you'll be getting accuracy that can't be matched by most other flywheelers. The select fire is the icing on the cake, which makes the blaster suited for ammo conservatives and trigger happy enthusiasts. The main reason not to get an SBF is the price. It's 450 Singaporean dollars for just the hardware, and that doesn't include LiPos, shipping, or the printed parts. To my knowledge, Gavin is only selling the hardware kit at this time, so if you don't have a printer of your own, commissioning someone to print the parts for you is added costs. The price is balanced out, as this is probably the most accessible brushless flywheel blaster out there right now. If you want an SBF of your own, at the time of recording this video, the SBF hasn't been officially released. Gavin is accepting requests to purchase hardware kits of him on a case-by-case basis if you have another one of his blaster designs and you send him a message. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, press YouTube buttons, and I'll see you in the next one.